Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts, Whiskey and Sweet Tea, discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Today we are back around the campfire to conclude summer camp month and to consider Wes Anderson's adorable, colorful, and heartwarming Moonrise Kingdom. So roast a marshmallow, craft a s'more, and don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised, spoilers are ahead. Hello, listeners. Welcome back. I hope you have some bug spray because we're still at our, well, whatever camp we're at Camp Whiskey and Sweet Tea. How about that?
Haven't been murdered yet. Hope you guys enjoyed the last episode.
And hopefully you're still alive if you're at summer camp. I was thinking about, I actually never went to summer camp as a kid. Like, I don't know. Is that something that you did, Whiskey? Is this like a thing that I just missed out on, like a childhood rite of passage?
Yes, it is, actually. I mean, I went more than most people. Well, maybe not more than most people, but I was actually an Eagle Scout, so I went all the time.
You're an Eagle Scout?
Yes. I think we've talked about this outside of the show.
My parents will respect you so much more than me now.
I'm pretty sure we brought this up. Didn't you say one of your brothers was an Eagle Scout too?
My older brother, is an Eagle Scout. Y'all are a dying breed. So,
well, I mean, outside of that, I went to other camps. Like pretty much, I think from the time I was like 9 years old up until I was like 18, I think I pretty much was always somewhere. Like even if it wasn't Boy Scout camp, I went somewhere like to a different camp. When like I was never home for summer. I was always out doing stuff.
So what you're telling me is I had a boring childhood. Got it.
Absolutely.
So today we're here to discuss the very fun, very uplifting, very beautiful Moonrise Kingdom by Wes Anderson. And in true Whiskey and Sweet Tea fashion, we're over here sipping on something. I'm over here trying my new the Coke Zero, but the new Coke Zero because they changed the flavor again. So, we'll see how this goes.
And I am keeping it light. I'm just sipping on a Pacifico beer. It's been very hot here in LA, so I am just cooling off with a nice cold beverage.
Has it hit 100 degrees there yet?
It might have a few days ago. It was in the high 90s for sure, but I don't know if it actually breached 100. Like it was nuts though. It was really hard to
what's wild
to stay sane.
It's wild here in Texas. We haven't hit 100 degrees yet, which usually we've done at least 7 or 8 days already, but I don't think we've done it yet. Anyway, so today's topic, Moonrise Kingdom, 2012 release. It's directed by Wes Anderson, music by Alexandre Desplat, which if you don't know his name, he did the score for The Shape of Water, so obviously already in love. Costumes were by Kasia Walika Maimon, and I want to apologize for maiming a bunch of these names. Two things: if I have trouble reading names, and also I can't read my own handwriting half the time. Cinematography was by Robert D. Yao, written by Wes Anderson and Roman Coppola. Production design was by Adam Stockhauser. And art direction was by Gerald Sullivan. We had in the starring roles as Sam, we had Jared Gilma. Susie was played by Kara Hayward. Scoutmaster Ward was Edward Norton. We had Captain Sharp as Bruce Willis. Miss Bishop was played by Frances McDormand. Mr. Bishop was Bill Murray. Cousin Ben was Jason Schwartzman. Social Services was Tilda Swinton. And the narrator was Bob Balaban. So this is a movie I picked, even though I had never seen this one before. I kind of knew the idea that it has something to do with sort of at a summer camp. It's actually a scout camp. So when Whiskey announced he wanted to do Friday the 13th for August, I was like, oh, let's do Moonrise Kingdom because I haven't seen it yet. I want to see it. And I think it also takes place at a summer camp. So first things first impressions. Whiskey, is this the first time you've seen this, or is this a repeat for you?
Absolutely not. You didn't know this before picking it. I think I said so when you said you wanted to cover it, but this is actually my favorite Wes Anderson movie.
Wow. I think this is only the second one I've seen, and I was in love. I love this one.
I feel like you'd like a lot of his stuff. This is like, I mean, he's one of those like quote unquote stylistic directors. Mm-hmm. So a lot of his movies kind of hit a lot of the same notes. There's a lot of similarities with the way that he wants them to look. There's a lot of like kind of similar color schemes, a lot of pastels. He's a big fan of like 60s cinema. So there's a lot of things like, maybe you noticed this, but one thing that was, it's more 70s cinema, but he likes zooming in a lot.
Yeah, I did notice
One
that.
other thing you can immediately tell it's one of his movies is he's a big fan of symmetrical framing and linear perspective. So like in the very beginning of the movie, the thing that you can notice is all like you know the opening scene, right, where it's the music is like talking about how the orchestra performs the song, and it's selecting all of the different families and stuff. Well, you know how it's showing the different rooms. If you pay attention, they're all, when I say symmetrically framed, what I mean is that the subjects are directly in the center of frame, and there's depth created by kind of how do you, anyone who is listening who is a painter or a visual artist knows what linear perspective is, but it's kind of like when there is almost a sort of 3D illusion created. Like another example in the art world would be like the Last Supper.
Yeah.
Where the subjects, Jesus and fam are like in the center of frame, and there's kind of like a distance between you and them, and there's sort of a depth in the picture. That's what I'm talking about. And that opening sequence where it keeps panning to the different rooms, and they're all dead center, and there's kind of a distance between the very end back of the set and the people watching. So that's something he does in a lot of his movies. Another thing he's a really big fan of that I feel like you would be really into is he gets very creative with the production design.
Yes.
So one thing he's done in multiple movies, right off the top of my head, the Royal Tenenbaums and the Hotel Budapest, is he'll have almost like a dollhouse sort of like cross section of the house where it's like showing all the different rooms and stuff like that, and almost looks like kind of a storybook. So he has this very like whimsical style about him, and sometimes his movies are a little darker than others, but he always has this almost kind of like, again, storybook is the best way I can describe it, but almost kind of like there's an animated quality to it, and it's very surreal. One of my other favorite films by him that has kind of a creative twist to it is the Life Aquatic. That film takes place in the ocean, and it's about an oceanographer or someone who studies like ocean biology, excuse me. And all of the fish in that movie are all stop motion animated.
Wow, that's impressive.
Right? So he's I feel like if you enjoyed this movie, you should watch all of his other films, because also being from Texas, he is a UT Austin graduate, so he's repping Texas. And I feel like a lot of people wouldn't expect that from him, because you think of Texas, and UT Austin's a big artsy kind of university. There's lots of creative types that go to school there outside of film, but if you think of Wes Anderson, you'd probably assume he went to NYU or something like that, kind of with his style and also the sort of subjects he covers and where he likes to set his films. It has this very like almost like metropolitan sort of taste.
What's interesting is actually I come from a long line of UT graduates.
There you go. So I'm surprised you didn't go there.
They didn't give me anything.
If you had, I guarantee probably a lot of the students would have been a big fan of his, or the faculty would probably be like, ooh, Wes Anderson, he's visiting, blah, blah, blah. But he's there's a couple of big directors from there. Another one would be, of course I'm going to forget his name. He did Slacker, and he did School of Rock. Everyone who's listening could yell at me about it, but he's another really big filmmaker from Texas. And but I feel like Wes Anderson is the big one, and I've seen almost all of his movies. I think the only one I haven't seen is Bottle Rocket, but otherwise I've seen Rushmore, I've seen Royal Tenenbaums, I've seen Fantastic Mr. Fox, Darjeeling Limited. Like I like him. I kind of didn't when the first film I saw was Royal Tenenbaums, and I thought it was like weird and depressing. And it took me a while to come around. The first movie I really, really enjoyed by him was Darjeeling Limited. But so far, out of the films I've seen, which again I think are all of them except Bottle Rocket, this one is my favorite. And I think part of it is I love the way the Boy Scouts are portrayed in it. They're so hilariously organized to the point of it being ridiculous. Like, I wish my troop was that organized, for like
Right?
pressing their clothes and everything like that, and building tree houses and whatnot.
That you know what's when I first saw that opening, not the opening, but when we first introduced the Boy Scouts, you know what, it kind of gave me a Jojo Rabbit vibe,
Oh yeah,
just a little bit. And when you were talking about his use of cross sections like Dollhouse like, you know, and I've talked a lot about how my love for the movie Paddington 2 and Paddington, they both utilize that, so I'm sure they were inspired by his use of that. But that's interesting to kind of know that has kind of a historical precedence in his films.
well, we didn't get a chance to cover it, but you know, there was I feel like it was a series. I think it was like a film magazine I read this in, and they did a bunch of directors, but they interviewed a bunch of famous directors and asked them what their like top 10 favorite movies of all time were. And Wes Anderson's list, if you like Google, you might be able to find the article, but it was so perfect. Like, the sort of movies that he thinks are like the best, it's exactly the sort of movies that really feel like what he's trying to, you know, show off in his films. And one of them was one that we almost reviewed, but we ended up being postponed this year. It was Harold and Maude.
Yes, so that was on his list.
That's one of his favorite movies of all time, and that's one where if you saw that, you could definitely see how he is inspired by it, because it has a lot of similar sort of stylistic elements to this film.
Well, you know, this movie was interesting for me. One, because it's not like when it's because you know I don't have this back catalog of other Wes Anderson films like you do to draw on to be like, oh, I can see this. I've only, like I said, I've seen one other film of his, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and I think I remember I liked it, but I had no need to watch it again. But I was going somewhere with this.
While you're trying to remember, I liked that one. I felt like it was one where when it got all of the Oscar nominations and stuff, I was thinking, really, this is the one he's gonna get. I mean, he's always usually nominated for something, but I feel like that was the one that got him the most critical acclaim, and I was just thinking, like, really, this is. I get why. I feel.
You mean like Leo
Well, I
and
feel.
The Revenant?
Well, no. So it was the same year as the other director, whose name I forgot actually, who did Boyhood. But
Richard Linklater?
thank you. Yeah. So Richard Linklater is the director I was thinking of before. He's also a big UT Austin graduate. But anyway, so that year, I don't know. It's not bad. Anyone who's listening, I did not dislike the Grand Budapest Hotel. I was kind of surprised that it got more acclaim than his other films. And I guess I think it kind of checked a couple of the Academy's boxes. Like, it was a World War II film indirectly because it took place during that time. There was like kind of a murder element to it. I mean, it was very much one of his movies, but I feel like something about the setting and the characters and the time period probably made it a little more notable. One thing I didn't like about that one was I hated that there were like 3 framing devices. It was,
Yeah.
maybe you know what I'm talking about, but it's
I
like, oh,
remember
it's
that.
about a reporter who goes to a hotel, who talks to a bellboy, who recounts his time as a bellboy. When it's like, can't you just start the movie like where it began? I feel like that's the only time it was ever that convoluted in one of his movies. Like, this movie starts, you know, pretty much right as it should, like at the beginning of the story with him running away and everything. But that movie, it just was like layers of nothing for like 10 minutes. And even like other films of his I like Darjeeling Limited starts off with all of the characters rushing to catch, well, I guess it's one character, but he's rushing to catch a train to meet his brothers, and then the story starts. And then Royal Tenenbaums, it's done kind of like a storybook with a narrator talking about this family and who the family members are and what things were like when the kids were growing up and stuff like that. But it never had like layers of different people telling stories to other people, recounting the stories to the audience.
Yeah.
And long tangent, I didn't like that about that movie. but it was still good. But this one, it's not just the Boy Scouts. I really like the kind of love story too. It's really cute, and it's so funny how like almost like little adults the kids act. If
Yeah.
that makes any
No,
sense.
no, 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 yeah.
It's the way they speak. It's the vocabulary they use, and it's also like the way the main two characters, the lovebirds, sort of planned their escape was so sophisticated that it's kind of funny to the point where they really do almost outsmart the adults. If it wasn't for the narrator telling everyone that he knew which beach they were going to, they probably would have gotten away with it for a while.
Well, and that's like the one time the narrator interacts with the actual story.
Yeah. And it's well, not sort of. I mean, he is talking to the audience a number of times.
But I mean, like, it directly interacts with the characters.
Yes, exactly. So, which is also kind of interesting. Again, that's like it's such a Wes Anderson thing. Another like sort of quirky thing he did in the Life Aquatic is all of the music was David Bowie songs. But it was all, if I remember, I think all of it was always diegetic, and it was being played by a character on the boat. So that's exactly what I mean when I say he likes to have like really weird sort of quirky things in his movies like that. And then this one, it was not only having a narrator, but one who was sort of also a character in the film. And also one, like, that's the other thing. This takes place, I think they said 1964, 1965, something like that.
1965.
Yeah, and the narrator, like, exists in the time period, but he's also talking about it in past tense, like it's something that happened a long time ago. And it's so it's such a weird. It makes you wonder, like, is he omnipotent or something? Like, what is?
Well, I mean that's kind of what I kind of got the vibe from him. So we don't really get any backstory on the narrator, that he was kind of almost like a summer spirit or something, like kind of like My Neighbor Totoro. He kind of just shows up when needed, so he knows what's going to happen. He knows everything that's going to happen, and he just kind
Maybe.
of.
I mean, the other interesting thing is he seemed to be a meteorologist. I mean, he taught the scouts geology, so I guess he's just sort of a multi-talented scientific person. But he was more interested in the storm that was coming, which was also kind of an odd sort of framing device. And well, not a framing device, it was more of like a ticking clock element. At the beginning of the story, they tell you, oh, on this date 3 days from now there's going to be a massive storm that is going to wreck this island. And the funny thing is, like, whenever he's talking to the audience, he's talking about the storm. He's not talking about what's going on with the characters. He's like, oh, it's as you can see from this weather balloon, like the barometric pressure is dropping. So at any moment, so
He opens the movie by basically saying, "This place is famous for this storm that happened on September 5th in 3 days," or something. He opens it not even really talking about the story, but just about this event. It's like you said, everything happens around this event. Like I thought that was kind of interesting. It was kind of different. It provided, like you said, a ticking clock, almost like sort of a futuristic history lesson. That I guess is kind of the framing device for the story. It kind of reminds me of, like, at the way it was opened. It reminded me like at the opening of literally every Law and Order. They're represented by two equally important parties. These are their stories. That's basically kind of how it was. This island, this is its story. I kind of thought that was cool.
absolutely. Well, and that too. So at the beginning he talks the most, and he's also talking about the different parts of the island, the different, like, there's like forest, there's beaches, there's Chickasaw territory.
Oh yeah, the
and
Chickasaw.
all that sort of stuff.
I think it was the
He's
Chickasaw
an
Trail.
interesting character. Again, I'm not really sure. Like, I let you do the research for this one because I've just seen this movie a ton of times. I like the story and everything, but it's one of those where I haven't really looked into why he did a lot of the things he did. I guess you could just chalk it up to being Wes Anderson. Like, that's just
So
what he
actually,
does.
because I know some of the listeners will be like, seriously. Well, I did research on this, but it's such like a film that basically almost everybody has seen, that it was very difficult to find articles specifically focused on it. Like, a lot of times I'd be searching for things, and it was about Wes Anderson in general, and they would talk about this movie briefly. So I had to kind of sort of resort to the trivia section on IMDb to really kind of dig up some, kind of just different and more interesting facts about this.
Well, this is kind of, in my opinion, it's my favorite film of his, but I feel like it's one that's overlooked a lot because I don't ever really hear anyone talking about it. I don't think it was up for any awards when it came out. It was critically acclaimed. Like, critics liked it. I liked it. I think it made a decent amount at the box office, but it's not really talked about as one of his best movies. So I think that might have something to do with it. One thing I did notice, because I've watched this a number of times, but this time, I guess because I was watching it for the show, I was extra I was extra thorough, and I like watched all of the credits, partly because the credits were actually pretty interesting. Like, I don't know if you noticed, they were very animated and stuff, but it appeared to be dedicated to his father. There was a like rest in peace thing, and it was something Anderson. It might have been his grandfather, but he also at the very end of the credits said, this is dedicated to so and so Anderson, who was a scoutmaster. So I don't know. Again, I didn't really do any research, but I would think that was probably a member of his family, and he was involved in the Scouts, and so maybe that's what inspired him to write this story. And the other thing I didn't really think about, I don't know if you noticed this, but the title refers to that little inlet that they make camp in.
Yeah, that's not
because
revealed
and they never
the
actually
end,
say.
Well, it's revealed at the end.
Well, no, they never actually say, oh, we called this Moonrise Kingdom or something. It's like, oh, this doesn't have a name, but they never full on, they just scream like, this is our land or whatever, but they never say what it's called.
At the end of the movie, when he does that painting, on his painting, he's written on the shoreline, Moonrise Kingdom.
Oh, there you go. I'll check that out next time I watch it, because I will watch this again. But the other thing I didn't notice until this time watching it is that storm was so massive that inlet was washed away after the storm, so it didn't exist anymore. So that was also kind of a whimsical twist where it was like it was there for this specific important moment for these two lovebirds, and then as soon as their little adventure was over, it was gone, much like their little attempt to run away together. So that was pretty cute. And I missed that all the other times. Like, I didn't notice that the inlet was, maybe I did. I don't know. It's been a few years since I've seen it, but I noticed that this time more.
So, but speaking about specifically just rewinding a little bit, talking about the accolades, or the movies, I guess, that it received. It did get a nomination at the Oscars for Best Original Screenplay. It was nominated, did not win. It was nominated for some editing awards at the Cinema Editors Award Show. It was nominated for Movie of the Year at the AFI. It won that. The Austin Film Critics Association nominated it for Best Film. There's a lot of other ones on here. The BAFTA nominated it for Best Original Screenplay as well. The Cannes, it competed for the Palme d'Or, and I know I'm missing that. That's not how it's pronounced, but that's how I always say it. Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. It didn't win that. However, it won an honorary award called the Palme de Whiskers for the cat Tabitha. And there's just
the cat.
There's a lot of other ones. It was nominated by the Writers Guild for Best Screenplay. The Producers Guild nominated for Best Picture. There's a lot of also smaller critic awards that it was up for. It didn't win a lot. It won. The AFI won it for Movie of the Year. The Boston Society of Film Critics gave it an award for Best Use of Music in a Film. It won Best Art Direction from the Chicago Film Critics Association, and it won Best Feature at the Gotham Awards. And the Online Film Critics Society awarded it Best Original Screenplay. But it was up for, I believe, a total of 52 or 53 awards, and I think it only won 6. And none of them were really like any of the big ones. Like I said, it got one nomination at the Oscars, one at the BAFTA, but it really kind of flew under the radar as far as a lot of things go, especially like for a movie about this kind. And they've always said that if your movie's not essentially rated R, it really won't be taken seriously anywhere, and I think this is another case of that happening. I know there's instances where that hasn't been true, but historically, once we instituted a rating system, if the movie was an R, it's like people are like, well, you didn't take any risks. That's kind of how it's perceived. But this is like, I don't even think I was actually surprised this was a PG-13 when I watched it. To me, this, I was like, why is this a PG-13 and not a PG? This like really should have just been a PG movie. I don't know what the PG-13 was for.
There was some strong language, not to the point. I mean, PG-13 strong language. These days, if you want it to be PG, you can't even say stuff like "damn." So obviously, that was probably going to, knock it down a few pegs. This also dealt with some serious subjects. You have the foster care system. You've got depression. You've got spousal infidelity. You've got
which I would
some pretty violent Boy Scouts. You've got and not to mention, like, I think it's very cute. I don't think it ever crosses the threshold of being creepy or anything. But their little romance is also kind of borderline inappropriate. Usually played up for comedy. Like, there's that whole bit about how he does watercolors of nudes. Well, and stuff, and like, and again, like it never gets to that point where they go too far. But like when they're on the beach together and stuff, and he gets an erection. And, that sort of thing. Well, probably not PG material. They never go that far. They don't have intercourse or anything like that. But it is a little racy for a PG rating. I don't think, maybe in the 80s this would have gotten a PG rating. But today, I don't think. Or I guess that's the crazy thing, too. This came out almost 10 years ago.
Well, speaking specifically just on like the infidelity that was in there, I was kind of like, why is this even in here? This has little to no impact in the story. Like, I know that they say that the daughter sees it happen, and so she knows about it. But I'm like, this is really only in here. And I read about this. He has a history of putting crumbling families in his movies because of his own upbringing. But like, to me, the family wasn't really necessarily crumbling. I think they tried to do that, but it doesn't really work.
Because of his own upbringing. Well, you get an armchair psychologist about this. I didn't know. I don't know anything about his home life.
Well, but I think he didn't come from like a broken home, but he had his family. I believe they got a divorce. I believe at a young age. I was reading about this, and because of that's why he kind of has a lot of these families that are like, this is from what I read again, and this is what I'm reading in my research. I haven't seen also the movies, but I guess kind of like a crumbling family or a family that's having a lot of issues is usually what is usually kind of it's present somewhere in his movie. Like, that's like one of his like go-to, like, I guess, themes.
I think that might be a little overblown. It's true. Most of the families in his films are dysfunctional, but not to the point. Again, I'd love to meet someone with a perfect family.
Right.
Sometimes they don't really resonate with me so much. But I feel like he always makes them work, and they always feel believable. In this one, I do think that it was sort of important, just because I think that her parents' relationship was doing a lot to possibly influence her mood. She was obviously dealing with some psychological issues. She had depression. She had an anger problem, which I would say she probably got from her dad. But there's also sort of this level of hypocrisy with her parents, because, they're telling her what is and isn't okay as far as like her little, liaison with this little boy, but their marriage is like failing.
Right.
And the mother is, secretly seeing the police officer. And they don't really seem to even know enough about her dog. Like, that's the other thing. She runs away twice in the movie, and both times her parents don't even notice until she's long gone.
They have to be like alerted. I love that.
Exactly. But again, so like, I wouldn't say that it's pointless, because I think it kind of explains why she would feel the way that she does. Because I think if you took this girl who has a pretty, she lives in a nice house, she's got a pretty traditional sort of, nuclear family set up, you do kind of need to explain, like, why would she, come on to this kid who's in foster care and, who's a very nice little boy, but, if you, on paper he kind of comes off as like the bad boy, you know what I mean? Despite the
Right.
way he looks and the way he acts, like he's sort of the bad kid, you know. Oh, he doesn't have parents and he misbehaves in the scouts and he gets into fights a lot and he doesn't have friends and stuff. So, you know, obviously that would be judging a book by its cover, but at least with the whole spousal infidelity, I think that's kind of the reason it works in the movie, is because otherwise it would just be kind of weird.
Well,
You
I
know,
mean,
in real life, you don't necessarily need to have something bad happening for you to have like social problems or psychological problems. But I feel like in when you're telling a story, like you do kind of need to justify it a little bit. So that's why I think it works. Some of his other movies, the focus is on the family. Like the Royal Tenenbaums is the big one, where the whole point is that it's about a dysfunctional family.
mm-hmm.
But you are right that it's an element that's in all of his films. I just wasn't aware that he had a broken home.
Well, I don't mean he had a broken home, but his parents did divorce at a young age, and so that obviously had, just based on his later work and what we've seen appear, that obviously had some sort of, I'm not going to like speculate on the reasons or assume it was for bad reasons. I just know there was a divorce in his family at a young age, and it seemed to have influenced his work. That's all I'm trying to get across. I'm not trying to psychoanalyze him.
For sure. I'm just busting your balls, T. It also, again, I wish I could remember the full list of his top 10 movies. All I can remember off the top of my head is Harold and Maude, but that was something that was also kind of a common theme in the movies that he enjoys, was that there was usually some sort of not even family dysfunction, but there was a lot of like countercultural sort of things. Again, we did not watch Harold and Maude, but I do think you are at least aware of what the film is about. It's
Yes.
about a young boy falling in love with an 80-year-old woman.
Which is
So, yeah, very
precious.
very 1960s, 1970s sort of like hippie movie. But that's sort of what, again, if I could remember every movie on his list, that would be something that comes up. Actually, I think I remembered another one was Orson Welles' Magnificent Ambersons.
Of course, I don't remember that one.
That's the film he did after Citizen Kane that was critically hated. But I believe
Poor
that was
him.
another one on his list.
Well, you know, like, talking about all this, Wes Anderson has said this is his most personal film, and he says Susie Bishop is also his most personal character he's created. He spoke specifically on a lot of this was. And I'm going to actually read a quote from him about one of the main themes of this, but like, one of the big things in this movie that traumatized, I guess, Susie was finding that pamphlet or that little booklet on dealing with your troubled child and knowing it was about her. And he described, and I guess in the promotion or at least the later stuff about this, is as a kid he found something similar among his dad's things, and he was like, well, who else would it be about? I don't know if he ever confirmed it was for him, but he took it to heart that was for him. And so that experience sort of really sort of helped him create the character of Susie, and I think that's why the character of Susie is so personal to him, because that experience can be very disturbing for a child to find. You know, it's not because the parents are doing a bad job, but it's kind of like one of those things where it's like the parents trying to do what they can to make sure that they have the best life, but it's kind of like you can't tell the kid you're doing this because it makes them feel bad.
For sure. Well, and that makes sense. Again, I don't know anything about his personal life, but if it was like his parents are going through a divorce, that makes sense. Because, I mean, he was like, you know, well off enough to make it to film school. So in the 90s, I think. So, like, I would imagine that his life probably looked a lot like Susie's. And again, different movie, but the Royal Tenenbaums is kind of the same thing. Like a upper middle class family with like a very, you know, dysfunctional kind of relationship with one another. I don't know. That actually makes sense. There's also a lot of characters in his film like Susie, so I wonder if he usually like writes a little bit of himself into each film.
Well,
that would make a lot of sense. Susie actually reminds me of the character Margot from the Royal Tenenbaums. Very similar. You know, she was a playwright, so that kind of made sense as if that's a type of character he's really into. So, but that's interesting. And I'm glad he thinks it's a personal film for him, because again, like, I feel like this movie.
He said it's his most personal film, and Susie is the most personal character. That's what he said.
Good, because it resonates with me. Again, this is my favorite one of his movies, and I don't think it is overlooked by like fans of his. I'm
Yeah.
sure plenty of people like this movie, but I do think it was passed up a little bit the year it came out. I think it deserved a little more praise than it got. Again, at least I'm pretty sure it made bank at the box office, you know, relative to how much it cost to make.
Let's
But
see. It did. It made. Let's see. It made 4 times its budget. Because
good.
this was after what was it called? The Fantastic Mr. Fox came out and it didn't do well. So I think he said that he was having trouble securing people for like kind of more of a big budget thing. So he scaled down his budget a lot. Like his budget for this was only $16 million.
I'm surprised the Fantastic Mr. Fox didn't do well. I thought that I know it was up for Best Animated Feature that year, and I went to see it in theaters and thought it was pretty cute.
Well, I think it was a movie that came out and it was like it was kind of like one of the things that it wasn't appreciated in its time. I think people are now rediscovering it. Like I know that's when my mom wanted to take me to when I was younger, and we never got a chance to see it. I think she finally saw it on TV, but we never went to see it. I
You
was
missed out, man. It was a good one.
well, there's that one, but then later I think he's had trouble with animated films at least because like I saw Isle of the Dogs in theaters. That one I don't think did well either, and just I think from my own personal taste, I don't think it was a very good movie. But that's just my
I
personal
liked
opinion.
it. I thought it was. I thought it was.
It was a movie that I
It was
felt
his
like
most
was
depressing movie, and that says a lot. Like it was a very sad story, and it got kind of. I don't know. I liked the animation. I thought that was really good. I was really excited to see it when I went to see it because the trailer was super stylized. I loved that the music was very inspired by Japanese music.
hmm
And the story, I like dogs, and I liked that he got a like full blown like A-list celebrity cast to voice all of the dogs.
hmm
Uh, but I don't know. It's I
I
didn't think
I
the story was that great, but at
I
least it
remember
was that
watching
one
it.
was also.
I remember watching it and being and thinking there were scenes missing because I was like, what? like there was just there. I think I remember correctly like the bee story in there. I mean, I guess all the stories are connected, but I remember there was a story with like I think it was like a curly haired girl, and I remember thinking we haven't heard enough of why is she doing this again. There was like a lot that I think that was missing on her end, and I'm sure he had because it was an animated film, and I'm assuming it also to do with backing. He had to edit it down a lot from what his original idea was because
Well, it wasn't his idea. It's based on a children's book. Same
oh
thing. The Fantastic Mr. Fox is based on a Roald Dahl book.
oh really okay
Yeah.
see I'm just not versed in the Wes Anderson filmography. But now that you've told me that most of his stuff is depressing, that makes me maybe I don't want to explore this more.
Well, not depressing. Like, I mean, I said Isle of Dogs was his most depressing. I mean, he usually has some sort of, emotional hook to them, I guess. Like, all I'll say is you should watch some other movies of his. I'll recommend like Darjeeling Limited. I think you'd love The Fantastic Mr. Fox. It feels like a kid's movie. It's about like a heist essentially, except they're stealing from a mean farmer.
Well, you know me, I have a very deep appreciation for children's cinema. I do think it's a whole medium that's not fully appreciated for what it is. But going back to Moonrise Kingdom, talk about his personal. Some of the events in here were actually drawn directly from his childhood. Like like specifically the scouting. They said that was from there. But then the play, I think it's called Noye's Flood, the Noah's Ark play. He was actually in that as a kid. And I think I read that when they were doing production design of it, they referenced photos of the production that he was in, to kind of recreate it. And I thought that was like I said, when it wasn't just like the whole idea of how he found that book with that his dad had about how to deal with having a troubled child. But he pulled a lot of his own childhood in here. And from what I understand, even though it was written by him and Roman Coppola, it's mostly his child. The big thing people talk about as far as Roman Coppola contributing, I mean, he did more to the story and everything, but at least from personal backstory, is Frances McDormand walking around with her bullhorn to talk to her kids. I guess that's something that Eleanor Coppola did when Roman was a kid. which
That's pretty funny. Also,
that actually
the
explains a
Noah's
lot
Ark
of that
thing.
family too.
Well, the Noah's Ark thing's actually pretty thematically interesting
Yeah.
because you're dealing with a flood in the film, so it's almost kind of, relevant in that sense that there's sort of a theme of, a coming tide, they should say. But
Well,
again, I wish I had done at least enough research to see who the film was dedicated to, because it was a family member, I'm certain,
so
and maybe that's why he was.
at the end of the movie, I believe it says on the screen, it says like for Juna or for Juma or something like that, which it actually makes sense. That was at least at the time. I don't know if it still is. That was his girlfriend.
Okay. Well, in the end credits, like I said, like if you finished them, he dedicated it to Juma. Well, actually, I don't know. Maybe it was his wife. It was Juma Anderson. Whoever the first name was, the last name was Anderson. So to me, I took that as, oh, it's a family member. But I don't think it was his girlfriend, because in the end credits it states that whoever Juma is was a scoutmaster. So I think it was either his father or his grandfather.
So I'm double checking. Actually, I pulled up on the computer and it says the New Yorker's reporting that the movie is dedicated to Anderson's girlfriend Jumin Malouf, who is
Okay.
she's from Lebanon, which is why they go to Fort Lebanon.
Okay.
So and it actually
Now I'm curious. Now I'm curious who the person it talks about being a scoutmaster is, because that again different than like what you're talking about. I swear. Now I wish I had
well,
done
I'd also
research
read
because
that he wanted Ed Norton to be the scoutmaster because he said Ed Norton just looks like a scoutmaster.
he really does. It's funny. He's known for a lot of like very tough guy roles, like Fight Club and American History X. But
Mm-hmm.
just by himself, he's a pretty normal looking guy. So
Well, one of my favorite characters in this film was cousin Ben, played by Jason Schwartzman.
oh
He was
yes.
just I loved how seriously, and one of the things I really appreciate, well, first off, he was hilarious because he took everything seriously these kids were saying. He was like, I'll put you on a boat, and and I'll kind of explain. Some people be like, but they're kids, how's I kind of explain all that later, but I love that. I love how seriously he took the kids because as a kid, when you say something or that you want something, people don't really take you seriously. And since this is a story essentially from the perspective of the kids and what their dreams and desires are, that makes sense to me. But I also loved. I love the my two favorite scenes are when he's like, no, the $76 is my fee. I'm keeping that. And then he
Oh
finally he's
yeah.
guilted in by everybody giving them his money. And then when in the second one when he comes back because she forgot her binoculars, but he was great in that whole thing. I think he was like my favorite character in there. The whole wedding scene was awesome. But the one of the things I was talking about, I kind of danced around it just a little bit right now. When I was talking about for the perspective of the kids. So Wes Anderson, if I can, and I still have it up on my phone. He says so. His inspiration of this. He says he talked about being in love as like like as a I think he says a fifth grader. And he says I remember this feeling from when I was that age and from when I was in fifth grade, but nothing really happened. I just experienced the period of dreaming about what might happen when I was at that age. I feel like the movie could really be something that was envisioned by one of these characters. And when he said that, that made absolute sense. And you know me, Whiskey, I am a romantic. I had many a crush as a kid, but I know exactly what he's talking about. You kind of picture yourself going on an adventure with your crush. You get the whole you're like, oh, we'll do this, and then there's probably going to be some danger that we have to overcome, and you kind of, and at least and maybe I'm weird. Maybe me and Wes are the only people who did this, but that's kind of like what I remember. That I remember having these whole visions of what could happen, if you and your crush were able to get together and the adventures you would have and you would escape from. And I think this he really, I think he was also a kid that didn't fit in either, like, and I've talked about that with me before. I didn't fit in a lot, and so I would always fantasize about running off with my crush and having an adventure. And that's one of the reasons why I think I really emotionally resonate with the movie and I love this movie is because when I heard that, I'm like, that is exactly what is captured here. That's exactly what I'm feeling, and I love that. And I don't know if did you have that sort of thing with your adolescent love at all, or was that kind of just a me and Wes thing apparently?
No, actually, I think it's one of the strongest things with this movie because I think it's the most like relatable aspect of this movie is remembering what it was like when you were a kid and whether you had like whether you had crushes or you actually had any success romantically as a kid, the emotional intensity is still the same. Like if you had like a girlfriend in elementary school or a boyfriend, it was like you're in love, you're going to end up marrying this person. And if you were
Yes.
just crushing on someone, you still had that intense feeling. So I feel like again, this movie might not be recognized as much as his other movies, but I'm not that we're I am not the only one who thinks this is the best Wes Anderson movie. And I feel like the people who like this a lot, it's the love story that really resonates with people. And that's what the Scouts are one thing, but again, the two of them, it's so cute. And even though it's totally ridiculous, you kind of almost root for them, especially when you
Yeah.
see both of their home lives are so bad, like when Jason Schwartzman is saying, "Oh, I can get you a job as like a crab fisherman or whatever,"
Oh,
you're kind of
a
like, "Yeah,
crab
that's
cracker.
that's
That's what I was.
better than his current life." I mean, hey, he can
Well,
make money. He'll be able to pay for a house because it's the '60s and houses aren't that stupid expensive yet. Like,
well,
it's
and
it's ridiculous, but you kind of get in that mindset of where you're rooting for them to run away together, as stupid and as immature as it is. You're almost
well,
kind of at that same
and
level
and
with
that
them.
and that's kind of what I was saying when I was talking about the cousin Ben character. This dude's clearly an adult, but since like was it this is like a future you could easily see being imagined by one of these characters in their imagination. That's how it would work. You'd be able to talk your way through this. People would trust you. You know, they would let you get married and get you a job somewhere. And that's one of the things I love about this is
Well, it
it.
actually wasn't that far fetched for the 1960s. The idea, like, I mean, they were pretty young. They were like 12, but I mean, these days, the whole idea of that happening is completely absurd. But like back in those days, depending on where you lived, child labor laws weren't really a thing. So it kind of probably could have theoretically happened. Obviously, it didn't. But and the other thing, Jason Schwartzman, since you bring him up, he actually kind of owes a lot to Wes Anderson. His first film ever, his first acting job was Rushmore. Like the first director he ever worked with was Wes Anderson. He had
Wow.
never been in anything else. He was not a like professional actor, but he landed the role. And that's like a whole story on its own. He actually went and method acted through the audition process. Like he went out and bought a school uniform to wear to the audition because it takes place in a private school, and he got the job, and based on that movie he ended up becoming a big actor. So
Well, and also
he not only is in a lot of Wes Anderson movies, but the two of them are really good friends, and he owes his career to Wes Anderson as sort of because that film he could have gone with like a more well-known actor, but he went with Jason Schwartzman, and that catapulted his career. And again, he's in a lot of Wes Anderson movies because they have such a good relationship.
Well, what's
So,
interesting is I was reading what Jason Schwartzman said about working on the film, and he says, when he was offered the part of Cousin Ben, he could have, but he didn't ask for a larger role. And his reasoning is that he says, the way that Wes Anderson does everything is a fine puzzle, and he already has it worked out to what the best way to tell the story is. So he says the reason why he was totally fine taking a smaller role in this was specifically because he's worked with Wes Anderson before, and he knows how he works, and he has a respect for how he works. So I thought that was kind of cool to kind of hear that coming from an actor who worked on this. He also did, I guess, Jason Schwartzman also did a short film called Cousin Ben Troop Screening with Jason Schwartzman. It was also directed by Wes Anderson, and that was released on the platform Funny or Die to promote the
oh
film.
boy. Oh man, I wish I'd Funny or Die. I don't know if you know this. It's actually not online anymore. like I think the company went bankrupt. It's like a whole thing. It happened a year or two ago, but I wish it maybe. Well, they might have their YouTube channel still up, so I'm gonna see if I can find that. But yeah, and that's another thing about Jason Schwartzman. He's like a filmmaker in his own right. He's a cool guy. As far as like actors working today, he's really he's someone that you're happy got famous. he's genuinely talented. He's really good in every movie he's in, even if it's, you know, like another film he's in that probably a lot of listeners probably saw was Scott Pilgrim versus the World. He's like the bad guy in that movie, and he's excellent. He's like a perfect mustache twirling villain.
Well,
but he's really good. And again, I'm not surprised that he worked with Wes Anderson because they worked together a lot. And again, like he owes his career kind of to Wes Anderson because he took a chance on him in Rushmore. You know, he nailed the audition, but so I didn't think you probably knew about that, but I thought you'd find it interesting since his character really spoke to you.
Yeah, actually, his character was just awesome. I'm like, I want to be at a camp where this guy's the counselor because this looks like camp with him would be lit. But one other thing, speaking about the casting process, so Jared Gilman and Kara, and I want to make sure I'm reading my handwriting right, Kara Hayward, were both newcomers to acting. None of them had even like really auditioned for anything before. It said that Wes did he auditioned at schools in the area for like 8 months to find the right one, to find the right group. And actually he was impressed with one of the people who auditioned for the role of Sam, but he didn't think he was right for the part, so he gave him the role of, I think the character's name was Redford.
Is he the one that really hates Sam?
I'm trying to remember because I don't remember who I think if I saw his face, I would remember.
Well, that character, he had red hair, so that actually might make sense.
Maybe he was. I think he was the one that rode up. I think yeah, he was the one that was riding
That's what I mean.
Bike,
like,
yeah.
And that's genius casting too, because he can kind of focus all that hatred from not getting the part into hating the character. Like, so I don't know. That's who I would cast him as if he did a really good job, because it's like, well, you know, he got your part, so it's only natural that you'd be his arch nemesis.
But I love the fact that he was just like, you're great, just not for this part. But since we have a whole troupe, we can put you somewhere else.
The cast was really good. This is another, you know, we've talked about Bruce Willis in Die Hard, but this is another film that just shows. Sadly, nowadays he just does a lot of like straight to video movies, and you can kind of tell he does not care anymore.
Yeah.
But it's sad because when you give him any material, really, he can do a great job. He's known for his action movies, but you were familiar with him before in comedy and stuff, and this was a really good comedic role because he's playing a police officer, but he's kind of more of a schlubby, like, sad, as they call him in the movie, a sad police officer.
Yeah. I love how Francis is like, yeah, he is kind of, he's not dumb, but yeah, he is kind of sad.
Well, and I mean, he lives in a trailer, and like, although that was one of the best things about the ending. I love that he adopts Sam. That was such a great.
No, I kind of saw that coming when they were sort of talking about what do you have to be a guardian.
Yeah. Well, wasn't that right before he like?
That's when
he adopted him?
That's when they first talked to social services. Like, they were like, "Oh, he'll be here. We'll take care of him." I was like, "Somebody's ended up adopting." I'm like, "It obviously can't be the bishops." I actually at first thought it was going to be the Scoutmaster because he kind of had sort of a reckoning, you know.
Dude, that's another. I mean, I love Edward Norton in a lot of things. This is probably one of my favorite roles of his, just because he's very natural. I agree with Wes Anderson. He was kind of born to play a Scoutmaster, and it was really nice seeing him step up to the plate at the end when the camp is flooding, and he saves the super Scoutmaster who just got done chewing him out.
Yeah. That I thought he was great. I loved his character. I was worried, and I've seen, you know, movies like this that are kind of whimsical like this before, and they usually feel the need to add some sort of seedy, dark undercurrents. I kept waiting for that to show up, and I was glad it didn't.
No, again, I'm like this episode is whiskey tells sweet tea to watch more Wes Anderson movies,
basically.
And that's again like this. If you like this movie, you will like all of his other movies. Like maybe not Isle of Dogs, but all of his movies have kind of a quirkiness and a whimsicalness to them.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like Darjeeling Limited. It's about three brothers traveling India on a train.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Royal Tenenbaums is about a kind of terrible father faking having stomach cancer so he can try and reunite his family.
Oh,
You've got
adorable.
Life Aquatic, where it's about like a sea biologist trying to get revenge on a shark for eating his best friend.
Well, one of the things that I just really just enjoyed about this movie is this is like it's a movie that's considered, you know, and I don't like to throw this because I kind of have my own sort of hang-ups on this term, but I love the fact that it's a movie that's happy, it's a positive movie, but it's also considered higher art. And I feel like that's something, and I know I sound like I'm about 90 years old when I say this, but I wish that was kind of a more common occurrence. Is
Yeah.
that there could be things that people take seriously that are happy and positive, and we don't have to have, you know, everything has to be seedy and dark and or just everybody just sucks. And I really like there's not a character in this except for the foster parents. I didn't dislike a single character in this movie. I loved everybody in here. uh I was kind of I don't know why, but I was kind of shocked to see Bill Murray come down the stairs without a shirt on. I don't know why that freaked me out, but it did.
The
But
I agree with you, and I do think a lot of like male filmmakers seem to want to be like really edgy. Like
mhm.
that's their whole stylistic sort of thing. And I do think it's important like to distinguish yourself from the crowd, and you do have a lot of filmmakers that do that. You know, you've got people like Tim Burton who's got kind of a gothic style to his. You've got you know, Quentin Tarantino really likes like 70s like garbage movies that he's elevated into being like higher art or whatever. You've got Spielberg who really grew up on like Hitchcock and wanted to make kind of Hitchcock movies into like more fun sort of summer blockbuster sort of things.
Well, he
But I
invented the
feel like
blockbuster.
sort of. I mean, it existed before him, but he was the
Well,
one
I'm
that
sorry,
like made it a thing.
the summer blockbuster. He invented the summer
Exactly.
blockbuster.
Exactly. The summers used to be a time when, you know, they didn't really
Put anything
care
out.
about what they put out in theaters because they thought, oh, they won't make any money. But yeah, like I mean, that's the thing. Like I feel like it should be sort of effortless to come up with your own style if you're a filmmaker, because it should just be kind of how you naturally tell a story. And Wes Anderson, again, if you look at his like list of favorite movies, it makes sense what he is ripping off, for lack of a better word for it. But it's things that he likes. He's just telling a story that he likes, and that's really all it should be. But I feel like everyone who's trying to be a filmmaker tries too hard to distinguish themselves, or they copy someone a little too much to the point where they're not really being truthful as far as like this sort of
Of who they are as
voice
a
they have as a
filmmaker. Yeah.
storyteller. And I think that's something about Wes Anderson that's really awesome. And, you know, I think the thing that makes a lot of like art house directors kind of insufferable is they get an ego about
Yeah.
themselves. And I don't know if you watched any interviews with Wes Anderson, but he's not pretentious. He looks exactly the way you would imagine him to. He's always wearing like a really like vintage suit and stuff. But he doesn't have like, he's not a dick, you know? He's not like, oh, I'm just elevated, you know? Like he doesn't have like this air about him. He's just like, I like these old 70s movies and I like that kind of feeling in them, and this is, you know, how I like to tell a story. You know,
You know who I
he's not
picture?
like
I haven't seen him. I specifically didn't look at him because I kind of didn't want any like the way he looked at him until afterwards, and I just never got around to looking him up. But you didn't? Did you ever watch Sex in the City or not?
oh yeah.
Do you remember the character of Stanford Blatch? He
Ugh.
was like the gay. He
I
was the gay character on the show. He was like this. He was like a shorter, kind of bald man, a little bit older. He had these like round glasses, and
Was he in the movie?
yeah, he was in one of the movies. Yeah.
Okay, I know who he was.
And he always wore like some sort of like color blocked but like vintage looking suit, and that's for some reason that's who I was picturing. I'm like,
You
who would come
cannot
up with
see
this?
me, but I'm nodding. But like, so Wes Anderson looks like a character from one of his own movies. kind of a lanky white dude, but he wears those types of like vintage suits. Again, like I hoped you had like looked up an interview with him on video so you could kind of put a face to the movie or whatever, but he's, again, like the thing I feel like most people find insufferable about quote unquote art house cinema is a lot of these indie filmmakers have kind of an air about them where they seem to think that they're somehow superior to like other filmmakers because what they are doing is honest and truthful. He's not like that. He's just like, hey, I like these movies. He's like, I'm doing what I want to do, and this is how I do it. You know? And I feel like that's the best way to be. And the best filmmakers, in my opinion, they're just doing things the way they know how to do it.
Just circling back in to the movie specifically, and I know I think I've talked about this. I've always had a fascination with inclement weather and tragic events.
Oh God, yes.
Like,
how did I not think that it was gonna cycle back into the disaster movie?
So, but there's just something about, and I think this comes from the area where I grew up, and and I've been like, hey, Whiskey, guess what? We have another tornado warning. Just something about the energy in a situation like that. Everybody kind of shifts slightly to survival mode while still pretending like everything's okay. But then you also kind of all get stuck together exactly the way you are, regardless of whatever was going on before it. And for lack of a better word, there's just something incredibly magical about that. And I loved, and Wes Anderson and his portrayal of the storm at the end of the movie, he captured that perfectly. We have everybody's just kind of stuck together now. They all have to kind of face each other and deal with everything. In the
same church where they first met.
In the same church where the church where they first met. Actually, I think took me a minute to realize that, but I think I did realize that at one point. But there was that, and then we had, the social services people who nobody liked. And then we had, the parents who are just now realizing they need to do better as parents, and with the lover there also. And which actually, I'm not actually sure if they like had an affair or if it was like emotional cheating. It was never actually said. I think it was more, I kind of get the impression it was more emotional cheating. But we have it all together. We have it all going on. We have all the scouts in there. We have everybody, and just the energy that's created by all those people being together is just incredible. And then, like I said, you talk about going into survival mode. We still had the kids over there climbing on the roof to get away from these people. And everything.
And they were going to jump. They were going to jump off of the roof into the water.
I love her response. Do you think it's deep enough to swim? She's like, even if it's not, we'll break our necks immediately if it's too shallow. I'm just like, their realization as to what's going on is amazing. And
it's really sweet. I mean, even up until the end, Sam's like, hey, even if we don't survive this, it was really nice meeting you, Susie.
Right? That was just so sweet. That was so sweet. And then I found it hilarious that the parents who were like, you cannot see Sam ever again, were like acting as a proxy with social services. There for Bruce Willis's character, and she's like, you're not married, we can't consider you, and they're like, we find that discriminatory that you wouldn't even seriously consider. I loved all of that whole conversation was great, and I loved kind of the cliffhanger, that momentary cliffhanger where that we kind of get like sort of foreshadowing about earlier in the movie, that the lightning strikes the church and the top goes missing, and we're like, where? And they're just hanging on. So, just something about that is just so incredibly magical, and it reminded me of it's actually an Alfonso Cuarón movie, the ending of A Little Princess. It's kind of sort of a similar thing.
Yes.
But again, that's like a fairy tale, or it's more like a magical realism story as well, which is what this one also kind of is. And
it's also a remake of a Shirley Temple movie,
right? But I grew up loving that. I never saw the original one, but when people talk about, most people are like, oh, my first Alfonso Cuarón movie I liked was the third Harry Potter movie or something. I'm like, my first one was A Little Princess.
I grew up with A Little Princess, and then my mind was blown when I saw the Shirley Temple one, because I was like, it was a remake?
It was a remake?
I was like, what?
But they reminded me of that. So there was just so much about this movie that I just loved. And I've told you about this before with other movies that I've watched. I was waiting kind of for the other shoe to drop the whole movie, and it never did. And I was so happy about that because, like I kept telling you, I was waiting for some seedy undercurrent to come out, like that. The
Doesn't happen in
Scoutmaster
Wes Anderson movies.
was like low key a pedophile or something like that because it seems like
Doesn't
it se-
doesn't happen in Wes Anderson movies. You're thinking of literally like that. Even if like when I say something is depressing, like I mean again, Isle of Dogs, like you saw it. There's none of that. There's no disturbing weird undercurrents and creepy. Like he doesn't do that. It's not his style.
and I was just happy someone told a story. They told it well. It was happy. It was positive. It took me back to my childhood and what love in elementary school was like. But I made a note of this, but this is a movie I know that I will not fully understand for a few viewings, and I need to watch it. I think I'm gonna have to watch it a lot more to get everything that's in there because I think there's a lot that I've missed. But it's one of the things I kind of look forward to going back and kind of having the movie be sort of a treasure hunt where I discover more about why they did certain things. I know there's probably an actual reason why they have that whole discussion, and maybe you can explain it to me about the beginning. We're talking about the different parts of the orchestra, and they all kind of play the same theme, but it all sounds different. And then when it comes together, it's what we all recognize. I know that's
the way I interpreted that was kind of the way that everything came together in the end. You have all of these different groups all coming to the church for this big climax. That's the way I interpreted it. But again, that's kind of the beautiful thing about true art is it's up to your interpretation. So I don't think there is the reason for that. I think that is kind of up to what you make of it. Speaking of that, actually, I did not know that the composer was the same one as The Shape of Water. The music was one of my favorite things in this movie, that's actually really cool.
This is one of the ones I'm hoping they put out on vinyl, because you know me, I get some vinyl on there, I put it on, I do some dishes, I pretend I'm a 40s housewife.
It's a Wes Anderson movie, sweet tea. It's gotta be on vinyl. You kidding me? His vintage ass couldn't resist doing that.
Well, actually, just what you just said about that all comes to a climax, that kind of makes you think, because they talk about how it's all essentially the same sound. That narrator in that classic score recording, he talks about how they're all essentially the same thing, but they all sound different. They're all called variations on a theme, I think is what he says in there. And if you think about it, he's kind of right, because all the characters, they're all going through essentially love stories. Even the Scoutmaster, he starts off having a picture of his boss at his desk, and he ends it with having a picture of the telephone operator at his desk. Everybody is going through their own love story in this movie, and so maybe that's what. But they all, when they're separate, they all look different. But when you bring them together, they're all the same. I don't know.
That is very insightful. I actually think that's a really good way of looking at it.
Well, I couldn't have done it without you, sweet tea. Whiskey. you.
Are you sure all you're having is Diet Coke?
Maybe I put something else in there, but that's for me to know. But this one, and so even though this was one that I did recommend, that I selected, I'd never seen this movie. This is kind of like one of those movies that I was like, let me challenge myself, put myself out there with new directors and stuff. I'm really happy I picked this one, and it was just this was a very happy and moving piece of cinema that I cannot wait to watch again. Like, you know me, I collect the Criterion Collection when they go on sale. Next sale, I will be picking up a copy of this.
I'm glad it's in the Criterion Collection. Obviously it's a recommend from me.
It's a huge recommend.
I started
for me.
off the review saying it's my favorite, so you got
really?
that.
I thought that was code for I hated it.
No, this is my favorite Wes Anderson movie. I'd say it's this, Life Aquatic, and Darjeeling Limited are my top three.
I did want to talk about this very briefly before we go. The big theme of this is love, and it's specifically adolescent love and how it's like for people. So I found out doing research, this was actually Jared Gilman's first kiss. He'd never kissed anyone before at age 11. And he said like Wes Anderson was very sensitive to that. So when they did the scene where they has his first kiss, that was the last thing that was filmed, so the actors would be comfortable with each other. But he also did it as a closed set. It was just him, her, I think the camera operator, and Wes, and that was it. Because he was very sensitive.
That's so sweet.
Right?
That's so adorable. Fun facts, by the way. The two of them have starred in other movies together in the future. One that I'm actually eyeing for next season.
Oh, really?
And they play boyfriend and girlfriend in that movie, so it makes me kind of wonder, maybe
spiritual
love blossomed
sequel.
On the set.
Maybe.
Yeah, again, it's... Because I know in the movie that we might review next year, they are playing boyfriend and girlfriend, but I think they've also done it in other movies. So again, it's like, I don't know, maybe that actually ended up being, like, maybe they're dating. I don't know.
Well,
they're like, both of them are like 20 now.
Yeah, they're like,
wild.
they're a little bit younger than we are now. I think I read that Jared Gilman, he's currently at NYU going to Tisch. Which hats off to him.
I forget her name. The girl who played Susie was in The Social Dilemma on Netflix.
Kara Hayward is her name.
She was in the scripted section. She played like the teenage daughter.
Let me see. I'm gonna try to see if there's I'm looking at her filmography really quick to see if there's anything that I recognize. She was in Isle of the Dogs. Oh, she was in...
Oh, yeah, that's right. I think she was the curly-haired girl.
She was also in Manchester by the Sea. That's like another big film. I never saw that one. But
that's right. I forgot about that. I remember her in that.
And like any true starting off actress, she was in an episode of Law and Order SVU.
Yikes.
Well, it's kind of like a joke.
I'm not talking about the show. I'm talking about what might have happened to her in the show.
Right. She was also in. I never watched this. I had a friend who watched it. She was in 5 episodes of that Netflix show with Miranda Sings called Haters Back Off. That's the only things that are really jumping out to me that I've seen. There's some other stuff on here, but yeah, I'm excited to see this. It's not, I'm sure it's not related, but I'm like, now since they're boyfriend and girlfriend in this one, I want to be like I'm gonna be like, it's a spiritual successor to the film.
I secretly hope they're dating outside of this. But what do you guys think? If you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment for which Wes Anderson movie T should watch next.
Right? Let me know. Just not the Grand Budapest Hotel, because I've already seen it. So,
or Isle of Dogs.
So don't forget... Or Isle of Dogs. I saw that one too. So don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Definitely a huge recommend from me. And unless I misheard him, I think this is a recommend from Whiskey as well. And
no, just kidding. It's a yes.
It's now time for us to pour some sand on the campfire and send our last letters home, because this is the end of summer camp month. Next month we'll be having a whole new theme.
Back to school. Just kidding.
I mean, basically, I had a whole unit on this in school. Next month we're gonna be getting into some films that drew inspiration from some Greek tragedies. So be excited for that. But other than that,
don't be depressed.
Don't be depressed. But other than that, we appreciate you guys. Keep listening to us. Let us know if you want something different, like something different. Leave suggestions so that we're not always just recommending everything. And we will catch you all in the next one.
Stay thirsty, everybody.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.